Hello and welcome, dear viewers, to a new episode of Nile TV Newsroom Live. Tonight, and as always in this program, we'll look at different segments, politics, business, finance, technology, arts, and you'll also find sports in our program. So stay tuned for all of that and much more. Welcome back. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi held a meeting on Tuesday to follow up efforts of developing the health system nationwide. During the meeting, the president directed to intensify work to provide health initiative services to all governorates. The head of state highlighted the importance of providing needed funding and resources to improve health services. Moreover, the president stressed on achieving financial and operational sustainability for new health projects. The president made his directives during his meeting with Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli and Minister of Health and Housing Khalid Abdel Ghaffar. And President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi received on Monday Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen. Presidential spokesman Councillor Ahmed Fahmy said that President al-Sisi welcomed the Palestinian president, stressing Egypt's constant and historical support for the Palestinian people. Also on Monday, the head of state met with the prime ministers and a number of ministers and concerned officials to discuss efforts to retrieving state land. The details in this report.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi received on Monday the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen. Presidential spokesperson Councillor Ahmed Fahmy said the President al-Sisi welcomed the Palestinian leader, stressing Egypt's constant and historic support for the Palestinian people. The head of state also welcomed hosting the meeting of the Palestinian factions, which was held earlier at Newsroom city and was attended by the Palestinian president. For his part, Abbas expressed gratitude and appreciation for Egypt's support to the Palestinian cause. He pointed out that the factions meeting comes at a time and circumstances that necessitate national reconciliation. The spokesperson added the meeting tackled means of coordinating visions and stances regarding the Palestinian cause, including reviving the Middle East peace process based on a two-state solution.
And with us now over the phone is Mr. Tariq Rifat, journalist in MENA, the Middle East news agency. A very good evening to you, Mr. Rifat, and thank you for joining us. Now, President al-Sisi received on Monday Palestinian President Abu Mazen and stressed Egypt's constant and historical support for the Palestinian people. How did you see the meeting between the two leaders?
Of course, there is a very dire need for preserving legitimate Palestinian rights and continuing efforts to attain comprehensive and everlasting peace. We need, on the basis of the two-state solution and the establishment of a viable, sovereign and independent Palestinian state along the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, in accordance with international law. President Sisi asserted Egypt's firm and historical stand towards the Palestinian people. He also welcomed the meeting, especially with regard to completing the dialogue on various issues and files with the aim of ending the state of division and restoring the Palestinian national unity.
Yes. Now, Mr. Rifat, President al-Sisi also welcomed hosting the meeting of the Palestinian factions held earlier at New Al-Alamein city and attended by Palestinian President Abbas. How important was that, and how important is the current meeting in light of the latest developments?
Of course, the meeting was very important with the aim of ending the state of division and restoring the Palestinian national unity. During the meeting, we saw exchanging of viewpoints on the best possible ways to achieve national unity between the Palestinian factions. They discussed ways to coordinate positions and viewpoints concerning a number of issues related to the Palestinian cause, with special focus on reviving the peacemaking process in Palestine and the Middle East.
Yeah. And finally, the meeting tackled means of coordinating visions, as you mentioned, and stances regarding the Palestinian cause, including reviving the Middle East peace process based on a two-state solution. But what steps need to be taken for this to be achieved now, in light, again, of the current obstacles?
Yes. We saw President Abbas, he called on the formation of a follow-up committee from the heads of the Palestinian fractions to complete this dialogue. He asked the committee to start working immediately to accomplish its mission and to submit the agreements and recommendations it had reached.
All right, Mr. Tariq Rifat, journalist in the Middle East News Agency, MENA, thank you very much for your time and your input, sir. Time now for our first break here on Nile TV Newsroom Live, and please stay with us because we still have much, much more. Welcome back. The fifth day of the economic access sessions of the National Dialogue kicked off on Tuesday with the attendance of different categories from society. The Economic Access Committees discussed a number of files, with the Social Equality Committee discussing over 2 sessions the activation of the principle of equality of opportunities. In addition, the committees of public debt, budget deficit and financial reform discussed conditions and solutions to public debt. Meanwhile, the 5th session of the social access will start on Thursday. Post-divorce problems will be discussed over 2 sessions. A special education and scientific research committee session will be convened to continue discussing a draft law over forming a higher national council for education and training. The law was transferred to the National Dialogue from the Cabinet according to presidential directives. Minister of Endowments Mukhtar Gum'a said the Holy Quran is the most sacred Muslim sanctity and that offensive attempts against it are considered a racist crime. He said the burning of versions of the Quran in Sweden and Denmark requires swift action from both states to prevent such actions and reform laws that ignite religious hatred. He also said all must know that the Muslim nation was about to be out of patience, and what is taking place in these 2 countries is clear provocation to Muslim sentiments. Gum'a expressed dismay at the silence of legal and international bodies that call for the respect of human rights in these countries. Earlier, the governments of Sweden and Denmark reportedly said they are studying legal means to curb burning of Quran versions. The foreign ministries of both countries said their governments will continue dialogue with the Organization of Islamic Conference, the OIC, and will discuss decisions and recommendations by the OIC over the issue. The OIC has called on its member countries to take all necessary political and economic measures against countries that witness such actions. It said it has informed the Swedish government of its decision to suspend the status of the special envoy of Sweden to the organization over the latest incidents. Israel's Supreme Court said all 15 judges in a historic first would take part in a hearing on arguments against a law that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Religious National Coalition passed as part of an overhaul of the judiciary. The Israeli Supreme Court agreed to discuss on September the 12th petitions to strike down the bill ratified last week that limits its powers to avoid some decisions made by government and ministers, setting the scene for a constitutional showdown. A court spokesperson said the hearing would mark the first time in Israel's history an extended bench would preside. The judicial changes pursued by Netanyahu and his government have sparked an unprecedented crisis in Israel, opening deep divides in society, bruising the economy, and drawing concern from Western allies. The divide has spread to the military, with volunteer reservists saying they will not report for duty, and former top brass warning that Israel's war readiness could be at risk. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told Parliament's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee that the military remained combat ready in the face of mounting protests, but that there may be damage in the long term. Netanyahu's coalition says the judicial changes are needed to curb what it describes as overreach by a Supreme Court that it says has become too politically interventionist. Critics say the changes would remove effective checks on the executive's authority and could lead to abuses of power. Israel's democratic foundations are relatively fragile, and the Supreme Court is seen as crucial for protecting civil rights and the rule of law. And with us now is political analyst Mr. Mohammed Abdel Halim. Mr. Abdel Halim, a very good evening to you, and thank you for joining us. And
good evening, sir.
Sir, thank you very much. Now, Israel's Supreme Court says that all 15 judges in a historic first would take part in a hearing on arguments against a law that the Israeli Premier's Religious National Coalition passed as an overhaul of the judiciary. This is a first for the judiciary in Israel. The hearing would mark the first time in Israel's history an extended bench would preside. How do you see this crisis?
Well, as you might have described it right now, that it's commonly regarded as a crisis, very much severe one, of which Israel the coalition, as much as Benjamin Netanyahu is facing at the present time, actually, being very much notoriously known with his extremism, as much as he's very much stringent, so ruling. I mean, Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, as a prime minister, actually did state the fact that, that next Monday we will be hoping actually to reach to a consensus of opinion among the ruling coalition, constituted of a large number of parties, sometimes religious, sometimes chauvinistic or national, to reach to a consensus of opinion or agreement with the opposition party, actually, around, reaching to one final attitude towards the amendments or correction, of reaching to an overall estimation of a plan concerning the judicial system, very much provocative, very much, vastly criticized, hoping to reach to put an end for that sort of struggle and tussle actually towards the end of next November. In much the same way that Benjamin Netanyahu as well, stated in a TV, show that after a large number of hours actually of reaching to, a consensus of opinion among the parliamentary figures at the Knesset, to reach to an agreement, a measured agreement in the plan that will limit or minimize actually a large number of decision-taking actually and decision-making processes actually concerning the Supreme Court in Israel. That all these courts actually will be, separate in somehow or another. And much the same way that he considered the fact that the Knesset or the Israeli parliament actually would reach to a consensus of opinion discussing and representing as much as underlying one major point in the amendments and the corrections, judicial ones indeed, that will constitute a new step actually towards, reorientation or the correction of the new path to what you might call this democracy and real sense of the word.
Right. Now, Mr. Abdul Halim, there is a showdown, there is a constitutional showdown. The judicial changes pursued by Netanyahu and his government have sparked an unprecedented crisis inside Israel, opening up deep divides in society, bruising the economy. Some say the divide has reached the Israeli military. You know, how do you see this, all of this going, Dr. Abdul Halim?
Right. Well, rightly so, actually. I mean, the previous decisions, actually, on discussions and examination of all these extremist ideas, actually, and somehow or another did give rise to a great deal of, you know, I mean, what you might call a division or a split into the Israeli community, actually. Particularly when Benjamin Netanyahu, I mean, stated at one time, actually, that the representation of the recommendation of the point of reasonableness, actually, sort of the thing, you know, I mean, that will be in somehow or another in favor of, you know, I mean, the parliament or the parliamentary figures, the Israeli parliamentary figures, could be regarded as one of the suggestions, actually, the major suggestions in the plan of amendments and corrections that had been represented and had been discussed, actually, by the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, the extremist one, the right-handed one, I would say. And in the meantime, that might, you know, I mean, cause a great deal of split and a sort of division among the Israeli people, among the Israeli citizens, actually, in the streets, apart from the politicians, apart from the judicial systems, actually. We had seen and witnessed, actually, large protests, actually, and protestations among people and marching people in the streets, representing their own denial and reacting against, if not their own supreme rejection, actually, of, you know, I mean, his own existence at the head of the parliament, actually. And this is not quite new, actually, in his own diplomacy and his own way of ruling the Israeli people, because in more than one respect, throughout a large number of years, actually, Benjamin Netanyahu was commonly regarded as the most provocative and the most critical sort of prime ministers, actually, during the history of Israel, giving rise to a large number of protestations, of rejection, of denial, and in the meantime, a sort of thing that, you know, I mean, ended with, as you might have mentioned, right now, a sort of a division in the streets among the citizens and among the judges in the meantime. You know, I mean, that part of point, actually, or that point that will limit and minimize the sort of the authority of the Supreme Court, actually, in rejection and denying the decisions that are to be taken by the government, could be regarded on the part of the Israeli judge as very much far from being logic, as not in the interests of their own emancipation and liberation and their own distinction authority or their own distinctive supreme authority, actually. A sort of a thing that will be in somehow or another discussed during the course of the next January on the part of the, you know, I mean, the governmental party that had been constituted and established side by side with the right extremist, you know, party on the part of Benjamin Netanyahu, and the religious part as well that are very much extremist and very much, you know, not in favor of those judges, actually.
Correct. Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad Abdul Halim, political analyst, for your time and your input, sir. Time now for another short break. Don't go away. We'll be right back. France started evacuating French and European citizens from Niger on Tuesday, days after new army leaders seized power in the West African country. The overthrow last Wednesday of President Mohamed Bazoum, the seventh military takeover in less than 3 years in the West and Central Africa, has sent shockwaves across the region, pitting Niger's former Western allies against the likes of Russia and other junta leaders in the region. Former colonial power France has had troops in the region for a decade, helping to fight an insurgency, but some locals say they want the former colonial ruler to stop intervening in their affairs. On Sunday, supporters of new army leaders burned French flags and attacked the French embassy in Niger's capital, Niamey, prompting police to fire volleys of tear gas in response. And a doctor was killed and a nurse was wounded in Russian shelling of a hospital in Ukraine's southern city of Kherson on Tuesday, according to regional officials. The surgery department of the facility was also damaged in the shelling. Elsewhere, a high-rise building in Moscow's business district that houses 3 Russian government ministries was struck by a drone for the second time in 3 days on Tuesday in what Russia called an attempted Ukrainian terrorist attack. A Ukrainian presidential advisor said Moscow should expect more drone attacks and more war. The building that was struck is known as the IQ Quarter, which houses the Ministry of Economic Development, the Digital Ministry, and the Ministry of Industry and Trade. Meanwhile, officials in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, said on Tuesday that drones hit populated areas of the city, and one drone destroyed 2 floors of a college dormitory. And moving ahead, at least 11 people were killed and 13 went missing after heavy rains lashed Beijing in downpours that have submerged roads and deluged neighborhoods with mud. Storm Doksuri, a former super typhoon, swept northwards over China after hitting southern Fujian province following its battering of the Philippines. And heavy rains in China began pummeling the capital and surrounding areas on Saturday, with nearly the average rainfall for the entire month of July dumped on Beijing in just 40 hours. Time now for the economy here on Nile TV Newsroom Live. European stock markets were mixed at the start of trading on Tuesday following gains in Asia. London's benchmark FTSE 100 index rose 0.2%. In the Eurozone, Frankfurt's DAX fell 0.2% and the Paris CAC 40 was flat. Stocks were mostly resilient and oil hovered near recent highs on Tuesday as investors stayed positive over global economic prospects, even as data showed signs of risks. UK stocks edged up 0.1%, however, with HSBC climbing 2.6% after announcing a $2 billion share buyback and raising its key profitability target. Investors are readying for an end to a series of US Federal Reserve interest rate hikes, with an increase last week widely seen as one of the last in its current tightening cycle. And Britain committed to granting hundreds of licenses for North Sea oil and gas extraction as part of efforts to become more energy independent, drawing criticism from environmental campaigners. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak confirmed plans for more than 100 such licenses, which attracted bids earlier this year, and said hundreds of future licenses could also be granted. He also announced fresh support for 2 carbon capture and storage clusters in Scotland and Northern England. Britain has a target to reach net zero emissions by 2050, but Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said even by this date, the country is expected to get more than a quarter of its energy from oil and gas. He said new domestic fossil fuels would help to improve energy security and reduce reliance on states such as Russia. Lebanon's central bank must gradually stop funding the government and lift the peg on the local currency, Vice Governor Wasim Mansour said hours before he is set to take over as interim chief. He added that any lending to government from now on must be temporary and will be conditioned on the state's capacity to repay the loan. The details.
Lebanon's incoming interim central bank governor Wasim Mansouri urged the government to undertake long-delayed reforms to address a deep financial crisis. He said he would seek to restrict central bank lending to the heavily indebted state. The first Vice Governor Mansouri is due to take over as the interim chief after ruling factions failed to appoint a successor to Riyad Salameh despite the meltdown that has fueled poverty and frozen depositors out of their savings. Salameh, aged 73, leaves office after a 30-year tenure tarnished by the meltdown that has paralyzed the once sprawling banking system, as well as corruption charges against him at home and abroad, which he still denies. Failure to appoint a new governor reflects wider dysfunction that has left Lebanon with neither a fully empowered government nor a president, further hollowing out a state paralyzed by the 4-year-old financial collapse. Mansouri was nominated by Vice Governor in 2020 by the Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, a pillar of the sectarian system. Criticizing previous policies as unsustainable, Mansouri told a news conference future lending to the government should be restricted to specific uses and conditioned on the state demonstrating it could pay the bank back. He vowed to reject any government financing request he was not convinced by and which were outside the legal framework. The crisis has given rise to an array of exchange rates for the Lebanese pound, which has sunk by some 98% since 2019. Mansouri said exchange rate unification would happen without central bank intervention and without spending more money. He also said authorities should phase out a controversial exchange platform known as Sarafa and lift the peg on the local currency.
And with us now, dear viewers, over the phone is Dr. Mohammed Rushdi, banking expert. A very good evening to you, Dr. Rushdi, and thank you for joining us. Now, Lebanon's incoming interim central bank governor has urged the government to undertake long-delayed reforms to address the deep financial crisis and said he would seek to restrict central bank lending to the heavily indebted state. How do you see these statements?
Actually, first of all, good evening for you and our audience. Nowadays, I would like to start with the global vision, what's up, what's globally, what's happening, which is, as you know, and our audience, there is a global inflation rate, which has negatively impacted a lot of countries, and Lebanese has one of the highest inflation rates countries, and was a lot, as far as I recall, of devaluation for their currencies, and it makes sense that they are trying to figure out solutions to get out of this thing. First of all, they are starting with changing their monetary policy committee. They will start to absorb the liquidity in the market. They will increase the interest rate more and more to get the excess of cash to decrease the inflation. And in addition to, they will apply the inverted yield curve, which is one of the most important things, because, as you know, and our audience, part of this thing, which is the debt. A lot of countries, as you know, they are offering sovereigns for banks and for the nation, and part of this, they are paying interest for the institutions or banks or individual or household segments. Actually, they will let that apply the inverted yield curve. They will offer sovereignty with low interest rates for short term to decrease debt, but the cost of debt for long term. This is one of the most important things. And they will work on changing to have a new law. In addition to the last thing, which is the most crucial thing that I would like to highlight, let me quote you, the lending part, they will limit it. As you know, when there's an high inflation rate, what's happening? It makes sense that the interest rate is increasing less to that, and actually when the interest rate is increasing, the appetite for lending is decreasing. And this is the most common tool for central bank and government that they are playing globally to decrease the lending appetite for the household segment or for the companies actually to decrease the inflation, and this is part of the tools that Monetary Policy Committee or the central banks are playing globally to absorb the inflation.
Right. But Dr. Rushdie, how feasible is the plan of Mr. Wasim Mansouri, the incoming central bank governor in Lebanon, when he says, for instance, future lending to the government will be restricted to specific uses and conditioned on the state demonstrating it could pay the bank back? And when he says he will reject any government financing requests he is not convinced of, how feasible is his action plan? I mean, will it work in your opinion? I mean, the atmosphere, the overall atmosphere in Lebanon. I mean, is it, what should we expect?
In my humble opinion, it's challenging for him to do that, but I believe this is one of the most important things. The issue, to simplify to our audience, the issue which is the debt cost. When the government is lending and the debt cost is quite high, it negatively impacts the balance of payment, and the lending or the interest or the service, they are calling it the debt service or the interest rate, is more than the GDP growth, or the GDP growth actually. And this is negatively impact any country, especially what's happening nowadays globally, the inflation rate, the global inflation rate, especially after the Ukrainian and Russian war and before the COVID pandemic. In addition to that, Lebanon, they have a lot of challenges internally on a political level, on an economic level, and this will be quite challenging to stop this. And if they successfully did it, it possibly will reflect on the balance of payment and the cost of that.
All right. Dr. Mohammed Rushdie, banking expert, thank you very much for your time and your insight. Final break here on Nile TV Newsroom Live. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The Euclid Space Telescope, launched July 1st on a mission to shed more light on elusive dark matter and dark energy, has reached its destination orbit, and on Tuesday, its European operators revealed its first test images. The star-filled snapshots were taken during the Space Telescope's commissioning, a phase during which its powerful instruments are finely calibrated and therefore not representative of its full potential. But the European Space Agency, the ESA, says the tests already show it will be capable of fulfilling its massive mission. After blasting off from Florida, the satellite has traveled about 1 million miles away from Earth to its observational orbit. From there, Euclid will chart the largest ever map of the universe, encompassing up to 2 billion galaxies across more than a third of the sky. By capturing light that has taken 10 billion years to reach Earth's vicinity, The map will also offer a new view of the 13.8 billion-year-old universe's history. Its visible light camera will let it measure the shape of galaxies, while its near-infrared spectrometer and photometer, developed with the help of NASA, will allow it to measure how far away they are. Sports now in the FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. The Netherlands powered into the last 16 of the 2023 Women's World Cup as group winners ahead of holders the United States, as Holland demolished Vietnam 7-0 on Tuesday. Esme Brugts netted 2 long-range stunners as the Netherlands rediscovered their scoring touch in a crushing 7-0 win over Vietnam, reaching the Women's World Cup knockouts in style and locking up top spot in Group E. The Dutch had only scored once in each of their 2 previous games, but knowing goal difference could decide, the group winners were 4-0 up inside of just 25 minutes, with Brooks' curled effort to pick off the bench. The bunch. Her second goal in the 57th minute was a carbon copy of the first and put the Netherlands 6-0 ahead before Jill Roord also bagged her second of the night to wrap up the emphatic win, the biggest of the tournament so far. The Netherlands were expected to finish behind the United States in the group, but the defending champions were held to a goalless draw by Portugal in Auckland and ended in second place in Group E. The 2019 runners-up, the Netherlands, will travel to Sydney for their last 16 tie on Sunday and are likely to face Italy, who sit in second place behind Sweden in Group G, who are likely to face the US of A. And the USA had reached the knockout stages of the Women's World Cup with a 0-0 draw against Portugal, surviving a late onslaught from the tournament debutants to keep their title defense alive at Eden Park. The 4-time champions and the 2-time defending champions were playing with everything on the line, but spurned several chances to find the net, and the addition of veteran Megan Rapinoe in the second half did little to turn things around against a physical Portuguese defense. They survived a huge scare in stoppage time when Ana Capeta hit the post, and another when the striker won a free kick just outside the box a few minutes later, but held on in the nerve-searing final minutes of the Group E clash. Italy will in the meantime play South Africa at the Women's World Cup on Wednesday, following a 5-0 thrashing by Sweden that left Italian players in tears. But coach Milena Bertolini is confident they learned vital lessons for the crucial game in Wellington, New Zealand. The 16th ranked Italians are second in Group G on 3 points, thanks to a 1-0 victory over Argentina. South Africa are 54th, but the FIFA rankings have counted for little at this World Cup with a number of upsets. South Africa's attack has caused problems in their 2 games, a 2-1 loss to third-ranked Sweden and a 2-2 draw with Argentina. And finally, UNESCO experts have recommended that Venice and its lagoon be added to its list of World Heritage in danger, as Italy is not doing enough to protect the city from the impact of climate change and mass tourism. UNESCO World Heritage Center experts regularly review the state of the UN Cultural Agency's 1,157 World Heritage sites, and at a meeting in Riyadh in September, a committee of 21 UNESCO member states will review more than 200 sites and decide which to add to the danger list. For nearly 10 of these sites, the experts recommend that member states put them on the danger list, among which already are the historic center of Odessa, Ukraine, the town of Timbuktu in Mali, and several sites in Syria, Iraq, and Libya. Other sites recommended to be put on the danger list this year are the cities of Kiev and Lviv in war-torn Ukraine. That is it for this edition of Nile TV Newsroom Live. I hope you've enjoyed it. This is Mohammed Abdelrahim, and I thank you for watching.